Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we tackle a single relevant question based on our Bible reading for that day. This week our reading is centered around the book of 2 Peter. Today I'm joined by Alyssa Bream and Jay Rivenbark, and our reading was 2 Peter chapter 2. He says, "But there were also false prophets in Israel, just as there will be false teachers among you. They will cleverly teach destructive heresies and even deny the master who brought them. In this way, they will bring sudden destruction on themselves. Many will follow their evil teaching and shameful immorality. And because of these teachers, the way of the truth will be slandered. In their greed, they will make up clever lies to get hold of your money. But God condemned them long ago, and their destruction will not be delayed." In my experience, if you were to ask people the greatest threat to the credibility of the church when it came to leadership, they would most likely talk about sexual immorality, because and when sexual immorality happens in the church, we often address it pretty quickly. Most churches, not always, but most churches in general are going to address sexual immorality among leadership. But I've always held the belief that greed or mishandling of funds, usually driven by greed, has caused more people to turn away from the faith than sexual immorality ever has. That's my opinion. And so he talks about here, he said, their greed will cause them to make up lies to get hold of your money. Why is greed such a temptation to distort the gospel? Why are ministers so tempted to manipulate people? Why does it cause people to manipulate others for money's sake?
The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. When you combine the sin of greed with a platform to influence people to have that kind of access to them, it is easy to give in to that. The manipulation or the temptation to distort the gospel is really a display or manifestation of what's in the heart of an individual. And it goes to show you there are no limits, because if you will distort the truth of the Word of God intentionally for the purpose of greed, selfish gain, then that is your God. It's an absolute idol. He talks about some of it's done subtly, some of it's done pretty overtly. Depends on the level of the individual, who they're reaching to. But in Scripture tells us very clearly that greed is a sin, and if it's not dealt with or held in check, it bleeds right on over into the church world, into individuals who are supposed to be God's people and chosen, and it's an ugly situation. It can be.
I think it's easy when there is a fairly black and white line, because we're able to see that sexual experiences outside of marriages are not right. So it's easy to draw a line, say, oh, this pastor did this thing that was wrong. We can draw that line. When the church is handling money and they're asking people for money, which is something that we do because we need it to function, to spiritually serve people and to help people grow, that line is blurry. And so I think it's harder to be able to tell when that line starts to get crossed. Are we asking for too many things? Are we using it in a right way? That line isn't a black and white line. And so it's easier for people to kind of cross that and use greed, and for people not to be able to see that, because they love their pastor, they love what's going on in the church, and then all of a sudden they've been taken advantage of, and then at some point they realize it. And so I think that when there's a black and white line, it's a lot easier. When you get into that gray area of how much money you should give the church and things like that, it gets messier.
There are two scenarios. There are people that I know that are relatively true to the gospel, but are manipulative where finances are concerned. And frankly, I don't like any of them. I don't like any of it. I don't know which one's more dangerous. And when I say manipulative, meaning they'll create scenarios where people feel sorry for them. They'll take money in ways they shouldn't take it. Take more than they should take, lean on the church's goodwill. There are a multitude of ways I've seen that happen, where people will tell sob stories that are partially true so that people will give them money. I've seen people abuse in multiple situations the church's credit card, not and then expect the church to forgive it or to cover it. So it wasn't, they weren't distorting the gospel. On another level, though, I have seen people who I believe manipulate the gospel for their own benefit. So, for example, I'm a firm believer that you cannot give and not receive something in return. I don't believe it's possible for you to be a giver and not get. But if you tell people, and I've heard this said, if you commit to X amount of seed, because that's the good word, and I think that's a manipulative word at times if it's used wrong. If you'll commit to giving this much every month, you can be debt free. Well, sure you can. The answer to that is yes. Is that how God's going to give you back? I can't make that promise. And I also don't believe you can plant enough seed to overcome ignorant spending. So if you keep on, abusing your own finances, you can't give enough to God that suddenly you're going to overcome your own ignorance and stupidity. And so that's a manipulation of the gospel. And that's a place where I think they fudge on the gospel. I believe sowing and reaping is a biblical principle. I think giving and receiving is a biblical principle. I think if you give, you will get. I believe that's a biblical principle. But I don't believe I'm always going to sow a seed of dollars and receive more dollars.
Yeah.
That's just not always how it works out. I think that's a manipulative way of doing it. I think that there is we've had private conversations. I do not want people to believe that you can't prosper or God doesn't want you to prosper. But there's a whole niche of the gospel we call the prosperity gospel, where they teach you that if you have enough faith, life is going to be perfect. And that's a manipulation of the gospel for their benefit, because, if that is why that's like motivational speakers, who, when you hear them speak, sound like, man, they're always up. Everything's always good. But sometimes their life sucks. Sometimes they have a bad day. Sometimes it's more difficult for them to practice what they tell everybody else to practice than it is to live it. And I think that when we preach a gospel that you're never going to have any problems, you just got to have enough faith. That's a manipulation of the gospel, because when people feel good, they're like, oh, okay, I want to be in on this. I want whatever he's got. And, I think it is that the difference between the two is the person who is being fair to the gospel, but manipulating people through other means, either through sob stories or just blatantly stealing money. I think the ramifications, for the most part, are singular on them. Now, when you take money from the church that could be used for ministry and those kind of things, there are some effects for that. But the people who manipulate the gospel for their own well-being, there are some real dangers, because then it's not just you're benefiting, but you also could be leading some people down a path that could be destructive for their own selves. I've known people who gave everything they had to people who were manipulating the gospel for their own benefit. And it's so sad to see, because those people go on scot-free and other people are over here suffering. And I don't know if y'all have experiences or thoughts or ideas about how greed is a nasty sin. I mean, it's a nasty sin that takes us and we don't even realize it. Like, I think it snaps us up and we don't even notice it. Because if I had to guess, and this is my observation in general about ministry, people who are led astray, they didn't start out with those intentions, but it became it became a big ordeal.
Yeah, I think on a larger scale, greed is one of those aspects, because unfortunately, oftentimes, quote, TV preachers are lumped in that. And it brings a dishonor and discredit to the gospel. And there are many people who never will listen to the gospel because of the perception of certain individuals. If you call certain names right now, people will automatically associate them with greed, excess, lavishness. And so therefore they will never give the gospel an open ear because of that. And as you said, what they're doing for personal gain, though, has significant outward consequences, and that's a very dangerous thing. And obviously, and I truly believe there'll be accountability attached to those folks, for that.
Yeah, I can think of moments where money wasn't handled properly by pastors in my life, where things went wrong, and but I haven't encountered personally where it was greed. Now, I've seen it in specific moments where it's like, I think what you were kind of talking about, where like they're taking an offering and they are pushing as hard as they can to get every last penny out of the people to make them feel sorry. And it's like, oh, like that just, you said this was a free concert. Why don't you just charge for the tickets? Like I think that
don't guilt people into giving.
Right. Yeah, I've seen a lot of those guilt offerings before. And even like when I was a teenager and at big conferences, and they're guilting these teenagers into, giving up their pizza money for
You don't need pizza
for whatever, and it's like there is that fine line because, people have the ability to give and people want to give, but how hard do you push?
I hadn't thought about it in the context of music, but I spent a lot of time in the music world. And there was a particular guy, and he was a preacher, but he traveled and sang. He was the best offering taker I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, I could be there singing, and I wanted to give and borrow money from the person beside me to give what they had in their wallet. I mean, he was just that good. I mean, I saw him one night in a room in the 80s. This would have been 82, 83. The place was packed, but there couldn't have been more than 150 people in there because it was a small building. And he took up an offering of $1,800. Now, $1,800 don't sound like a lot, but in 1982, 83, it was an enormous amount of money in a group. Whereas on any general night, if you would have taken up that offering and just said, hey, we're taking up a love offering, and that would have been it, and you would have said a prayer, you might would have got $150, $200. And I was like, golly, he is good, and Yeah, and that really, it's a talent.
Well,
You know,
I'm
it's a
getting ready to ask the question: Can that be a gift?
Yes,
used
the answer to that
And
is
Jay's like, can I be imparted that gift?
there is
in the
is-
right manner, though.
there are people who I do
in the
believe.
right
There's
parameters.
another person that I'm thinking of right now, and his son and I are friends. His dad I'm acquaintances with, but his dad is 95 now, and he's still living. And I promise you, if he took an offering, it would be the biggest offering. I watched him one night take an offering, and the gig was world missions. And at the time, in a particular type of meeting, he was taking an offering. The largest offering that had ever been taken for world missions was like a couple $100,000 in the denomination. And he became the director, and he got up, and I shouldn't say he can cry at the drop of a hat, but it's a gift. I mean, it really is a gift, And he took an offering that night. It was $2.7 million, 10 times what the biggest offering they'd ever taken. And I mean, I was like, holy cow! And then to top it all off, he brings this man out that's a friend of his, and he says, what y'all have given tonight is a record. He's promised to double it, and the guy doubled it. He wrote a check for 2 points, and it was just crazy. But now I would say it was a gift because he didn't benefit from that, and there was no personal gain from that, other than maybe he got a few more votes for the next time, elections took place. But he was taking it for world missions, and 100% of it went to the field, to missionaries. But I do think you can have a gift. Like in my opinion, John Maxwell has a gift. I've never seen anybody be able to get money out of people like John can. And he'll tell you, he said, I have a gift. And he said, if you don't want to give, you don't need to get around me. He said, because you're going to want to.
You're going to accidentally give.
He would tell you, look,
my thumbs can't stop.
What did I do?
John's a mediocre golfer. I'm going to tell you this story that I saw happen. He's a mediocre golfer at best. He's 76. He'll be 77 next month. And from when we're recording this, just a few weeks now. And we do these. He does fundraisers where we'll all gather and play golf. And there's this guy from Texas, and he gives a lot of money to John's organizations. And John doesn't play most of the time when we play. He just comes around and talks smack to us all. He says, if you can make this putt, I'll give you $100. If you can make this putt, I'll give you $200. If you hit the green, I'll give you $100. He's out there we're just having fun. And so the other guy's name is John too. He walks up on the hole and he said, John, you're out here giving money away. He said, I want to give some money away. He drops a ball down 50 feet away. And he says, if you can make this putt, I'll give $25,000 to Equip. John says, well, you better get ready to write your check. He said, because the Lord's given me the spirit to raise money. He said, I'm going to make this putt. And he walks up to it and sinks it.
Really?
Yeah, 50 feet away. The guy says, if you can do it twice, I'll give $100,000. He said, well, you better get ready. He drops the ball 50 feet away, same putt, and he sinks it. Now, that won't skill. I'm just telling you, and the guy gave $100,000. It was just that kind of situation. And in John's case, he sold 40 million books. He don't need to benefit from raising money to do that. But it's just I do think the answer is yes, it's a gift. And to distinguish between the two is very difficult at times. And the other danger is that our gift don't get away from us and it becomes self-serving. That's true with any gift, whether it's teaching, preaching, administrations, all of the gifts can become self-serving and become about us, and we can heap the praise on ourselves. So. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation around the book of 2 Peter.